Hello, this is Mr. Nolan, and I want to talk to you a little bit about photosynthesis and how do we balance this and what does this mean. So we know that when we're looking at photosynthesis, plants produce, or they use CO2 and H2O, and they produce sugar, C6H12O6, and they produce some oxygen. But this chemical reaction, if we look carefully, is not balanced. We have 6 carbons over there, we only have 1 over here. We've got 12 hydrogens over here, we only have 2 over here. We have 8 oxygens over here, but we only have 3 over here. So this is a big mess. This does not work. And we also want to be able to say, what do the reactants and the products actually mean here? So I want to look at a little animation, just to kind of give us a sense for how do we connect the macro scale to the nano or micro scale. How are we supposed to connect these together? So if I have a plant here, let's say that it's a potato plant or a peanut plant or some kind of plant. This plant is taking in carbon dioxide and water, and it is producing sugar. And we can see if we look at this animation, we see the carbon dioxide is coming in by the black arrow, the water is coming in by this light blue arrow, and the products that are being produced are the sugar. We can see that's where the carbon goes. The carbon goes out here to the sugar, the glucose. And then there's oxygen, which is a waste product. The plant gets rid of that. So this is sort of an interesting animation to sort of keep in mind that this is a continuous process. This is always going on. And so we're going to go ahead and we're going to figure out how do we balance the chemical reaction for photosynthesis. So what I would recommend is that while we are going through trying to balance any chemical reaction, we want to know what the formulas for all of the molecules are. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to write these down. For glucose, I'm going to write C6H12O6. For oxygen, I'm going to write O2 because it's diatomic. For water, we're going to write H2O, and then for carbon dioxide, we'll write CO2. So here we have written out all the formulas. So this is the first step. And if we look at these formulas, like when we saw in the reaction, we can see that they are not balanced. So let's go ahead and we're just going to jot down for glucose how many of each atom we have. We'll start with glucose because we know that we're going to produce a sugar molecule when we do photosynthesis. So let's just write down the atoms we have. We have 6 carbon atoms, so I'm going to write that here. We have 6 oxygen atoms, so I'm going to write that there. And we have 12 hydrogen atoms, so I'm going to write that there. And this is a product. So I need to figure out now what are the reactants that have to go into this in order to make this possible. So we know that carbon dioxide has just 1 carbon for each carbon dioxide. We can see that 1 carbon right there. So let's start with carbon. So our glucose has got 6 of them. And we know that each carbon dioxide has got 1 carbon. And so it's pretty easy to say, well, we must need 6 carbon dioxides because each carbon dioxide has a single carbon atom. So if we were to go ahead and finish this row, we've got carbon dioxide has, the 6 carbon dioxides has 6 carbon atoms. There's 12 oxygen atoms because 2 times 6 equals 12. And then there's no hydrogen atoms at all. So this is our first step, is going back and for either water or carbon dioxide, we can go up there and we can say, well, how many of each atom will we actually need? If we do the same thing for water, if we take a look at water, we know that there's going to be no carbons involved at all. Water does not have carbons. However, we have 12 hydrogens down here that we have to deal with. We have to deal with these 12 hydrogen atoms. So in order to do that, how many waters are we going to need? Well, we know we're going to need 12 hydrogen atoms in our glucose. We know that those are going to show up there. So how many waters will we need? Well, there's 2 hydrogen atoms for each water. So if we multiply 2 by 6, we're going to get that 12, that number that we need. So for water, water is going to contribute 6 oxygen atoms and 12 hydrogen atoms. So that solves for water. Now we're pretty sure, just by looking at this diagram, that we've got it. We have added these up. We've got our 6 carbons dealt with, and we have our 12 hydrogens dealt with. We'll deal with oxygen last. But let's go ahead and add up our reactants. And we get 6, 18, 12, right? We get this, this 6, 18, 12 business. And we know that our reactants have got to equal our products. These are actually going to be the same numbers. So I'm going to have 6, 18, and 12 in my products. So at this point, the last thing that I have to do is solve for oxygen. So the difference between that 6 and that 18 to make 18 is going to be 12. Obviously, there's no carbon in oxygen and there's no hydrogen in oxygen, but that 12 is going to make the difference. So 2 times what equals 12? Well, that number is going to be 6. So that's how we get this 666 chemical reaction, is that we just go one at a time. You just balance your carbons, and then you balance your hydrogens, and then you do your oxygens dead last. And once you've done that, well, you've got it. You've got it figured out. Let's talk a little bit about energy before we wrap it up here and write out our balanced reaction. The energy, if you recall, the form of energy that we're going to find in sugar is going to be chemical energy. Another way of saying food energy. And we're talking about plants, and so we want to think about, well, where do they get the energy for producing that food? The important bonds that we're looking at here are carbon-carbon and carbon-hydrogen. These are bonds that make something organic. Essentially what that means is that it was created by a plant, or perhaps by an animal of some sort, some other living thing. So carbon-carbon and carbon-hydrogen bonds. If we look carefully at glucose, the way that glucose is built, I don't have a diagram here to show you, but what we would find if we were to count all of these bonds, we would find that there are actually 12 carbon-carbon-carbon hydrogen bonds. And so there's like 12 units of chemical energy inside this sugar molecule. Well, where the heck did that 12 units of energy come from? Well, it came from light. That came from light. And to be specific, it came from 12 units worth of light, because you can't create or destroy energy just like you can't create or destroy atoms. So this 12 units of light came in here from the sun, and so that's where the energy that's in glucose actually came from. It ultimately came from sunlight. So if you do, let's say, have a bonfire, and if you burn, some wood, that wood was produced by plants. Wood is chemically really just glucose. It's just bonded a little differently. So when that wood burns, it's just releasing this light energy that was originally captured by the plant in the first place and then stored as food energy. When you take a match to your log and you light it on fire, this chemical energy is now being released in the form of heat and light. So we always want to think about light or energy as being not destroyed, but it moves and it transforms. Sometimes it goes from concentrated to less concentrated, or the other way around, but it changes forms. So now if we jump all the way back to our first slide, and if we just take a look at, well, how are we supposed to write this then? Our chemical equation that we decided on was CO2 plus H2O is going to be created into C6H12O6 plus some oxygens. But we said this was not balanced. Well, if we just go ahead and we just take our numbers, and we said we find out 6 carbon dioxides, there were 6 waters, that produced 1 glucose, and then gave us 6 oxygens as leftovers. These here are our reactants. And these over here are our products. Now, I can switch my carbon dioxide and water. I can switch my glucose and my oxygen. Those are fine. It doesn't have to go in any particular order. However, what I am not allowed to do is to switch this order without changing the direction of the arrow. So this is actually not allowed. I can't just switch those like that. But this reaction is showing us that our reactants, we've got our 6 carbon dioxides and our 6 waters, those yield 1 sugar and 6 oxygens. So that's how we would go ahead and write this equation, is by taking that step-by-step approach, and eventually you will be able to find out, oh, well, these are the numbers that we have for this. So I hope that this was illuminating and that this sort of helped you to figure out maybe, how do I balance this kind of a reaction.